our winter webinar series hosted by University of Illinois Extension's Local Food Systems and Small Farms team. I'm Grace Margario, the educator in Madison, Monroe, and St. Clair counties, and today's webinar moderator. We're so glad that you've joined us for your lunch hour. Please note that this presentation is being recorded. It's difficult to deliver in-depth, actionable information in 1 hour, so please put your questions in the chat box during the presentation. We'll do our best to make sure all questions are answered at the end of the presentation. The chat box can be used for all other technical questions related to the webinar, such as sound issues or other technical problems we might be able to help with. After today's presentation, you will receive an email which will include a link to a recording of this webinar and a link to a very short evaluation. We want to hear what you think about our webinars, so please take a minute or two to fill them out. If you'd like to fill out the evaluation survey immediately after the webinar, look for a live link in the chat box or a scannable QR code. Before we begin today, please complete the demographic poll here in Zoom. If it hasn't automatically popped up for you, you can click on polls in your webinar toolbar. This is voluntary demographic information that helps Extension continue to provide programs like this for you. So now that the logistics are out of the way, I am very pleased to welcome Catherine, Marley, and Dakari. Catherine Pereira is an extension educator for the Local Food Systems and Small Farms team in Cook County and has worked in food and agriculture for 30 years, over 30 years. Her mission in life is to improve farmers' income and quality of life as consumers access to local foods. Catherine's career began in Maputo, Mozambique, where she worked with peri-urban communities to establish woodlots, fruit orchards, and urban agroforestry food production. Upon her return to the United States, Catherine owned and operated a small organic vegetable farm in New Hampshire before returning to the Midwest to earn her Master's of Science in Agricultural and Applied Economics from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. She regularly volunteers with USAID's Farmer to Farmer program in Southern Africa and is currently living in the house where she grew up on Chicago's South Side. We also have Marley Wilson, who is the Good Food Purchasing Project Manager with the Chicago Food Policy Action Council, working closely with partners at the Chicago Department of Public Health and Cook County Department of Public Health to coordinate the Good Food Purchasing Initiative for the Metropolitan Chicago. She has spent the last 10 years working on community food systems development and advocating for farm to school initiatives. She holds a joint MS in urban and regional planning and agroecology from UW Madison as well. And Dakari Howard is the supply chain specialist from also with Chicago Food Policy Action Council. He is a gardener, organizer, and native Southside Chicagoan. In 2017, he worked as the urban agriculture liaison for the office of then 5th District Illinois State Representative, which is now the Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton. He has worked as a horticulturalist and youth farm manager and as an undergraduate researcher on the historical disparity in food systems. He recently returned to Chicago after serving in the Peace Corps as a business advisor supporting cacao cooperatives in Colombia's Atlantic coast. Dakari holds a BS in agricultural economics from the University of Kentucky and plans to continue pushing sustainable agriculture as a means to incite policy reform and civic engagement. So from here, Catherine can start with our presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Grace, for that introduction. As you heard, I'm Catherine Pereira, and I'm a former small vegetable farmer. And that experience really informed my mission as an extension educator to identify economic pathways smaller scale producers could use to increase the financial viability of their businesses. And so the good food purchasing policy that's been enacted in Cook County and Chicago has the potential to be just that. It's designed to create new market channels for growers within a 250-mile radius of Cook County by incentivizing institutions to purchase local foods. So just for clarity, today's format is a little different than some of the other webinars because we have three presenters. So first, I'm going to talk a bit in general about market channels, their advantages and disadvantages, and the decisions small farmers face when trying to access wholesale markets. Then Marley is going to explain what the good food purchasing policy is, followed by Dakari, who will talk about what farm operators need to do to access and meet the demands of this emerging market. And we'll do our best to leave some time for Q&A, and we will hang on after the presentation, after one, for more questions and answers. So first off, I want to start with some definitions just to make sure that we're all speaking the same language. This is data from the USDA Economic Research Service from late December 2020, and it's showing us that small farms, 89% of all US farms are small. And this is data based on gross cash farm income, right? So all the money taken in by a farm. And it's done this way so that we can look at very different farms in terms of the products they sell and the acreage they have and compare them to each other. So the small farm category is broken down into four subcategories. We have low sale farms. Those are farms earning less than $150,000 of gross cash farm income at about 32% of all farms, followed by farms that earn more than that, over 150,000, but less than 350,000. And those are only 5% of all US farms. The other two categories of small family farms are farms where the principal operators report they are retired but continue to farm, and that's about 10% of all small family farms, and off-farm occupation farms where the principal operators report a major occupation other than farming. And that's a large chunk of small farms, about 41%. So small farms are a large majority of farms in the United States. And when we look at this chart, also from the USDA Economic Research Service, we learn that 43% of farm households have income below median US household income, which is represented here by that orange dotted line. It's about $69,000. And what you can see, it's not the very large family farms or the large or even the mid-sized family farms. It's those smaller farms on the left-hand side in the medium blue bars, right? So on average, family farms are doing okay, but when you look at the small farms, there's another story. So we zoom in to the picture here and we can see that 43% of the small farms that are earning less than the median US household income are the retirement farms and the low sales farms. Moderate sale farms are looking sort of like a median US household that has self-employment income. And the off-farm small farms, they're looking really good, but we know a lot of that income is coming from that second off-farm job. And so while the picture isn't entirely bleak, it's concerning as those three categories on the left-hand side represent 84% of all US farms. And it's really hard to have a good quality of life without an income that meets your needs or requires you to earn a significant portion of your income at an off-farm job. So we, and all of you, I'm sure, want to find ways to improve this situation. So another definition here, now that we understand a little bit about the small farm income struggle, is I want to talk about what is a market channel. And that's exactly where and how you sell your farm production. And typically farmers utilize two types of market channels, a direct to consumer or indirect. And those direct to consumer channels are ones you're very familiar with. They're your agritourism and pick your own, CSA, farmers markets, your roadside stands. And your customers in these channels are looking for or making purchasing decisions based on quality, emotion, and trust in you, the small farmer. And in the indirect channels, the buyers there include things like marketing co-ops, your brokers, distributors, packing houses, wholesale buyers, and processors. And these are the traditional sort of supply channels for commercial buyers and regional and national sellers, not necessarily local buyers and sellers. Sometimes I group restaurants and grocery stores here in this indirect channel because they share really important characteristics with wholesale channels, especially if they're larger businesses. And they also do something to the food before a consumer actually eats it. And the buyers in these channels, right, these indirect channels, are also making purchasing decisions based on quality and price, but also on a whole lot of other things. They're basing it on the quantity that's available, accurate invoicing, deliver and storage capabilities of the farm, right? Packaging capabilities. And if you have things like farm safety plans, third-party verifications and audits and insurance. And so in this channel, emotion is likely out of the equation, right? Unless it's a smaller, very values-based businesses like some restaurants who buy from small farmers. And these customers primarily speak a different language than customers in direct market channels, which means you as a seller need to be fluent in that language to deliver what they need. And so here's just a little evidence confirming this idea that small farms rely heavily on direct-to-consumer markets. You see in that bottom bar that very small farms, one with less than $75,000 worth of gross cash farm income, account for nearly a quarter of all direct crop sales. And that number is even higher for livestock, where those very small farms account for nearly 60% of all direct farm sales. And the opposite is true, which you can see in the upper two bars, where those farms that earn more than $350,000 are accounting for the vast majority of indirect crop sales. So just a little evidence to confirm what we already know. Small farmers rely heavily on direct-to-consumer markets. So what's going on when we're with this push that small farms operate primarily in direct-to-consumer markets? As you can see from this chart, that each market channel has its own unique characteristics. And each of these 5 characteristics have the opposite impact based on if you're in a direct or indirect market channel. So if you look at that top bar with crop diversity, it tends to be very high if you're primarily selling in direct markets. In some sense, you're acting as a mini version of the supermarket for your customers and trying to give them everything they need and want. And you'll grow fewer crops when you're selling in indirect markets. If you look at the bottom bar, post-harvest handling requirements tend to be higher in indirect markets and lower in direct markets. But the classic story here really revolves around the price and volume that we all should be really familiar with, where prices are lower in indirect markets and the volume required is much higher. So of course, a larger acre farm is by nature able to produce more and can consistently supply wholesalers with the quantity that they demand, right? And this larger amount produced means farmers are willing and able to take a lower price and still, in theory, right, have a positive net income. And smaller farms generally are finding it difficult to meet the volume and price and those additional delivery post-harvest handling requirements of indirect markets and remain profitable. So it's like this idea that in an indirect market, you're losing your bargaining power. In a direct market, right, you can appeal to your customers' values and emotion to try and obtain that price you're trying to set, that little higher price. So often marketing channels are perceived as accessible based on your scale of production. where larger farmers are able to take advantage of economies of scale. So next, when we're thinking about choosing a market channel for our small farm businesses, there's some considerations that you need to take into account. And the first one is labor, right? Selling in direct market channels is really labor intensive. We have evidence of this from the USDA Ag Census that indicate in every sales category, farmers with direct sales hire significantly more labor than farmers with no direct sales. So think about this for a second, right? If you can add a wholesale account without adding staff, but you really can't increase the number of Saturday farmers markets without adding additional sales labor. Another important consideration when choosing your market channel is to think about your infrastructure and do you have the right tools to harvest and wash and pack large amounts of a crop? Do you have enough cold storage to hold a large harvest before the pickup or delivery by that wholesale buyer? And if not, are you willing and able to invest in this additional infrastructure? Another important consideration is to think about risk and understand that risk has two sides, always has two sides, a cost and a benefit. And it occurs in every stage of production and in every market channel. And it's also personal and perceived differently based on by every individual, right? So some find it very risky to have a whole truckload of tomatoes that could be rejected or bought at a low price, but others really like that with one phone call, you could sell that entire truckload of tomatoes, right? We often think of CSAs as decreasing risk by providing you with capital early in the season, but at the same time, it's risky, right, to satisfy all those customers for 22 weeks or half a year. It's a hard thing to do. Farmers markets come with that bad weather risk. So just keep that in mind. Risk is perceived differently and it comes with a cost and a benefit. And how you perceive risk can often lead to stress, right? And each market channel has its own stress points. And I just want to acknowledge here that no one source of stress is easier to deal with, but what you perceive as risky and thus stressful might change as you gain perspective and you gain experience and circumstances change on your farm. The final consideration that you want to make is to think about your lifestyle. Do you really like or dislike interacting with customers? We know we have to do that a lot in direct markets. Do you really like or dislike managing employees? So you really need to take all these things into account and ultimately balance out your labor and infrastructure risk and stress and create a system that works for you. So that this is my recommendation here, so that not only you can have the lifestyle you want, but be able to spend at least an hour a week in a hammock under a big tree. It's a great stress reliever, right? Everybody deserves to have that. This is from Michigan State University's Center for Regional Food Systems, and it's called the Market Channel Selection Tool. So it's a great thing to go through before you choose your market channels or when you're reconsidering your market channels. So now that we understand a little bit why smaller farmers turn to direct-to-consumer markets, I'm sure you're wondering, do you think are small farms locked out of wholesale markets? And my answer is no, because each farm has a unique profit equation, right? Just because you're getting a higher price in a direct market does not automatically equal profit. Earlier, we talked about those higher labor costs on small farms, which comes from selling in direct markets and managing many different crops. It might be possible for you as a small farmer to add in a half acre of carrots, which then you sell to a wholesale buyer for a lower price, but without adding that labor cost. And this additional revenue might be, right, something that helps you become a more profitable farm. You're probably also wondering, like, how do I determine if this is for me? Well, the answer, I'm sure you know, isn't easy, and you're going to need to take a deep dive into your business plan and farm finances to understand really what market channels are doing for you and what they could do for you. So as a first step, if you aren't already tracking your labor, you should consider doing so to understand really just how much time you spend selling through direct market channels. There's some really neat free apps out there that could help you do this. A farmer that up here was experimenting with one called Clockify, and doing, sort of short time use studies to see what was going on his farm. And then ultimately, it's really about finding the right balance that works for you on your farm and recognizing that adding a market channel can increase the complexity, right, of your farm system, but it also can help you to balance your risk and balance your profit equation. So I put this picture here of the purple kohlrabi in with the green kohlrabi to remind us that just like we diversify our crops, we can diversify our markets, right? And diversity tends to make systems stronger and less vulnerable to forces that are beyond our control. And the more experienced you are and the more planning you're able to do, the greater the likelihood that this strategy will work for you. So just wrapping up here, how is the good food purchasing policy an economic opportunity? It's expanding markets for Illinois growers and will increase the demand for food produced within a 250-mile radius of Cook County, which covers all but the very southern portion of Illinois. And if right now, if all public agencies and institutions in Cook County begin purchasing local food, the current supply just would not meet demand. The second reason involves this common grower pain point, identifying a stable market for your product. So the GFPP will provide that steady high volume market. And then as a new market, right, the GFPP could also help to diversify your business's marketing mix, spreading or decreasing risk. Recently, I came across a SARE study from 2018-2019 that was done in the Northeast. And farmers in this study were reporting up to a 35 or even 70% drop in sales at farmers markets. So in some areas, it may be that farmers markets have reached a plateau and you might not always be able to depend on them to grow your business. So right now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn this over to Marley, who is going to talk about how SIFPAC is building the information and infrastructure to make the GFPP market more accessible to you as a small farmer. So go ahead, Marley, and share away.
Thanks, Catherine. And I think you set up a perfect segue into the second part of this presentation. We did just launch a poll just to get a better sense of who's in the room. We know some of you are growing food, some of you may be distributing or processing food, and you might be on the other side buying food and interested in wholesale or institutional buying from local producers. So just want to get a sense of who's here, if you're just an interested community member or you represent a support organization. And if you are a different category than these, please feel free to share it in the chat and we'll be interested to see who else is here. And if you want to just introduce yourself in general and say hi, we'd love that as well. So again, I'm Marley Wilson. Grace had a very lovely introduction at the beginning of the presentation, but if you came in late, I'm the Good Food Purchasing Project Manager with the Chicago Food Policy Action Council. And I am going to share my screen here. Okay, and there we go. The Chicago Food Policy Action Council co-develops, facilitates, advocates for, and implements policies that advance food justice and sovereignty in Chicago and across Illinois. If you haven't heard of us, I absolutely recommend checking out our website. Put that in the chat for you just to get oriented to our work. We have been advocating for and supporting the implementation of the Good Food Purchasing Policy and related program here in the Chicago metro area. And we'll talk a little bit about what the policy is and the related program that we are now supporting implementation of. And I think there was an early question in the chat around whether this is a mandate or encouraged and enforced. Right now, and I'll answer that, Nicholas, for you as we go along in the presentation, but I'll make sure to flag that question. So the good food purchasing policy emerged out of the LA Food Policy Council, Los Angeles Food Policy Council, back in 2012. They developed this strategy for shifting public food spend towards 5 core values: local economies, environmental sustainability, a valued workforce, animal welfare, and nutrition. From the early success that they had with passing the policy through the LA City Council and working with the LA Unified School District on the good food purchasing policy, they spun out and developed the Center for Good Food Purchasing at the national level to support the policy adoption of GFPP, as we'll say GFPP quite a bit throughout this, which is just shorthand for the Good Food Purchasing Policy or Good Food Purchasing Program. So they set up the center at the national level to support folks like us in Chicago and elsewhere around the country with implementing the policy. And so back in 2015, 2016, CivPAC, the Chicago Food Policy Action Council, along with a coalition of organizations locally, pushed for and worked with the City of Chicago and Cook County government to consider the adoption of GFPP locally. And subsequently in 2017, Chicago Public Schools, Chicago Park District, and Chicago City Council adopted the good food purchasing policy as a resolution versus an ordinance. So to address the question in the chat, it is a resolution, which means it has slightly less teeth than an ordinance would. However, we have been actively working on implementation with our partners at the Chicago Department of Public Health at the city, and then the Cook County Department of Public Health at the county, to ensure that the policy is fully implemented with the public departments and agencies that buy food or contract with concessionaires and sell food on city or county property. So 2017, it passed at the city level, and 2018, the Cook County Board of Commissioners adopted GFPP as a resolution at the county level. So what we mean when we talk about public departments and agencies buying food or are selling, serving food on their property, we're talking about the National School Lunch Program that the school district runs. We're talking about the summer and after school meal programs that the Park District runs. Senior meals and emergency meals that are run by the Department of Family and Support Services. We're talking about O'Hare and Midway Airport's concessions programs, the City College cafeterias, the Riverwalk in downtown Chicago, where there are restaurants that have contracts with the Department of Assets, Information and Services to sell food on public property. And then the Department of Procurement itself does procure a small amount of food, as well as the Chicago Housing Authority. And on the county level, we're talking about the county jails and juvenile temporary detention center, the health and hospital system, and then their vending and concessions environments as well. So this is quite a broad number of institutions, public departments and agencies that we are collaborating with and working with on the good food purchasing policy. This may look very small, but this is just a teaser where we've been working on at CivPAC a map of all the different agencies and departments and the current contracted food vendors that they work with. Their food service management companies or the distributors that they have contracts with that they source food from. And what we're hoping to do is translate this map to our website, and within the next month, you should be able to go on to CivPAC's website and zoom in, click on each of the dots, learn more about the agency and how much food that they source, and what kinds of different contracts they hold, and how to actually contact the purchasing director at those various food vendors, so you can maybe potentially build a relationship with them. So this is kind of a teaser. We know it's a very small print right now, but we're hoping to turn this into a very useful interactive tool for everybody. And all told, this complex web of departments and agencies purchase about 118 million for their public meal programs annually. And we believe that the amount that is purchased by concessions environments is upwards of 300 million. So we're still evaluating the exact spend on food that concessionaires spend, but we have a kind of basic estimate of 300 million. So this is, quite a significant amount of spend that, if driven in a values-based direction, could fundamentally shift our food system, or at least support that shift in a big way. So I talked about the values at the beginning of the presentation, but just to review them again, it's nutrition, environmental sustainability, a valued workforce, local economies, and animal welfare. And there have been a lot of pushes over the last decade, especially for institutions to shift their purchasing with one of these lenses and perspectives. And groups across the country realized, we can actually work better together, and that all of these values are so interconnected with each other, that the good food purchasing policies approach of being a little bit more holistic with its lens makes a lot of sense. And I'll talk a little bit more about the standards in just a second, but the good food purchasing program connected to the policy is provides a framework for those shifts to happen. It doesn't just ask departments and agencies to shift all of their food spend to 100% local or 100% organic or 100% animal welfare approved products overnight, because we know that's just totally not feasible, and it doesn't provide a roadmap for departments and agencies to actually make change. So the good food purchasing policy kind of runs on data transparency and requests food purchasing data from institutions that the Center for Good Food Purchasing then assesses annually and understands what percentage of the spend of these agencies and departments meets the good food standards. And then how can we set goals from there that are realistic, actionable, and within the capacity of the department or agency to actually pursue. A lot of this rides on changing contracts and including good food purchasing language into the solicitations and requests for food vendors that go out from departments and agencies to food vendors, prospective food vendors, and really it needs to have compliance language around that data collection and partnership in meeting the good food purchasing set goals. So that is something that we're in the process of working with departments and agencies on right now. And then once we have that language in the contract and compliance, once we have conducted a baseline assessment of the spend of that institution according to the 5 value categories of the good food standards, then we can start to actually make shifts and increase the percentage of spend that's in local economies, in environmental sustainability, and so on. And we know this is going to take, this is a big paradigm shift for a lot of institutions that up until this point have really only looked at food procurement through what we call a lowest bidder lens. really just trying to kind of squeeze as much as they can out of their small budgets. And we are kind of tasking them with shifting towards this values-based approach. And that, we know that's going to take time. It's going to take complementary policies that are built up to support those goals. And we're going to have to celebrate success along the way, because this is going to be a long journey. And I want to make sure we're leaving plenty of time for Dakari to share and questions. So I'll just add that the standards are updated every 5 years by a national team of experts. It's not creating new certifications in any of these 5 value categories. It's based on existing certification programs and best practices. And for the local economies piece, I'll just say, as Catherine mentioned, that any producer within 250 miles is eligible for, to meet that standard. And so the food you'd be providing to institutions would be prioritized in that local economies lens. You may also, as a local producer, meet some of the other standards in environmental sustainability and animal welfare. But just kind of through that first lens of local economies, if you're a farmer on this call that's growing food in Illinois, this policy is meant to support your farm. Okay, so I will turn it over to Dakari now, and I'm going to give you remote control of the screen. Let me know if that works, Dakari.
All right, thanks, Marley. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dakari, and as Grace mentioned earlier, I'm the supply chain development specialist here with SIFPAC, and a large portion of my work with the Chicago Food Policy Action Council is to collect resources for producer development and look for pathways to help support producers become more successful in this GFPP process and enter into these institutional markets via trainings and certification processes. And with that being said, I think it's going a different way. Okay, cool. So one of the largest certification standards that we like to look at when it comes to institutional selling is the Food Safety Modernization Act. And I'm sure most of y'all are already familiar with FSMA, but for those who aren't, the Food Safety Modernization Act is a regulation standard that will affect how produce is grown, packed, processed, shipped, and imported to the United States. And it's primarily just focused on some of the standards that emphasize preventative controls for human food, producer safety standards, foreign supplier verification, accreditation of third-party auditors, and sanitary transport for food and feed. And initially, for most small to mid-sized farmers, when they were selling to directly to consumers, they had to adhere to FSMA, but not necessarily comply. But as we shift and grow our business and enter into these wholesale markets and institutional market opportunities, producers may no longer be exempt from FSMA standards. And so I guess a rule of thumb would be producers that are selling over 50% of their products to wholesale markets automatically must comply. And for fresh produce, the FSMA produce safety rule compliance requires that you have Produce Safety Alliance certification, which trainings pop up every now and again. We had one, I think, in January that we supported a couple of producers enter to that training and get that certification. Next slide, please. Oh. And we have a poll launching right now. So if y'all could take a minute to fill that out. All right, and some of the other food safety certification and third-party audit opportunities that come about, these are required by most of all producers and produce distributors and many institutional buyers, but the most popular one, I would believe, is the Good Agricultural Practices GAP certification, or Group GAP. And Group GAP is a really cool opportunity for a lot of folks, small to mid-sized farmers again. It includes some benefits such as saving group members some money for the cost of and resource sharing, improving some accountability options, performance and leveraging shared resources, decreases documentation and maintenance requirements for group members who operate under a single quality management system, and use some internal audits and share food safety managers to make some member compliance a little bit easier for folks. But along with that, we have like Primus, GFSI, Global Food Safety Initiative, coming up with a hazard plan, hazard analysis and critical control points for meat and seafood operators, and good food manufacturing practices for those who do food processing as opposed to food production. Next slide, please. Thanks. And so other considerations for institutional marketing. For this section, I think really creating some inventory, some self-inventory, and identifying some capacities within your own operations is important in this component. When it comes to liability insurance and post-harvest handling, volume and packing. Product liability is sometimes required for distributors and other buyers, and just really something to consider before entering into an agreement with a food distributor. So for example, some distributors, they just do not need you to have liability insurance, but some do. So it's about that relationship building process and what are the agreements before entering those contracts. The same as like post-harvest handling, volume and packing. Distributors, they will have a specific requirement for how products are washed or not packed and prepared. Some distributors, they just literally need you to just deliver the produce, and then they'll manage the packing and preparing and washing the produce as part of their hazard plan. And then others, you might need to, handle all of that prior to and simply deliver the product already pre-washed and packed, ready to go. And also just some of the things that like we collected through interviews with some of the distributors like within our networks. There may particularly not be any like quantified volume limit for producers who want to enter into contracts with suppliers. The details of the agreements are closely dependent on the specific product and the producer's ability to supply consistently over a period of time. So just going back to that self-inventory and collecting some of the information about what your capacities are within hopping into like, a larger contract with someone else. Next slide, please. So becoming an approved vendor. Becoming an approved vendor, this process varies by distributor. So the reality is that most farmers won't sell directly to these institutions, farm supply distributors or food service management companies. Farmers and food businesses can become an approved vendor or subcontractor for the contracted vendor. But like I mentioned earlier, the process varies by distributor or food service management company. Whether you're distributing to a private distributor or a public entity, that process is always going to be dependent. And some of the data that we collected to becoming an approved vendor with a private organization, it just begins with the producers reaching out to a sales manager to begin the relationship building process and set up a vendor account. During this process, suppliers meet with vendors to discuss the operation details such as product, volume, pricing, delivery schedule, and availability. Prior to establishing contract requirements and agreements, most vendors require producers to hold some form of food safety handling certification. And that's usually USDA certified GAP. With public entities, it's more so looking to what the bidding process is and understanding like what those timelines are and how to become an approved vendor with that larger public entity. And we included a really good resource by North Carolina, University of North Carolina, which kind of outlines how producers are able to start beginning that process of selling to larger distributors. And one thing to be mindful of prior to is just being prepared for that approval timeline. It could take weeks to months to finish paperwork depending on the company. So a lot of times like producers may need some support in preparing that paperwork and going forward with that and just being patient with the approval process. Next slide, please. Minority and women-owned business enterprise certification. So this is a really cool one. It provides like a large network for minority and women-owned business opportunities. It's optional certification. It's really useful in public with public distributors and in the bidding process, but it's optional certification that provides additional preference for profit businesses that qualify. The cost to start up with them is $500 if you're operating at less than $200 million or $2 million in sales, and it's $300 annual renewal fee. The paperwork process requires some time and support as well. But training opportunities and resources are always provided with them. And that will come through checking out the Women's Business Development Center and the Chicago Minority Supplier Development Council. And there's also a poll launched. So I'll give folks a minute to complete that as well. All right, and as Catherine mentioned, the Women's Business Development Center, they also have some support on the language. The language is super important when entering into these markets. Coming from direct consumer sales, it is a different talk path and how people operate business. So they do a lot of trainings on helping people become a little bit more financially literate and understand that language and enter into like these larger contracts. And they do host a series of workshops that people can hop in on. So I would really recommend anybody hopping into their websites and checking out some of the resources provided. We go to the next slide. And so some of the identified challenges and opportunities that we've discovered through my conversations with producers, food distributors, and other entities within like the food system. Corporate control and institutional food has undermined fair pricing. Equity concerns, socioeconomic barriers to the market channel, logistics, packing, processing, warehousing, transportation, certifications, and procurement process. It's a lot of time and money, and most small to mid-sized farmers are having trouble entering into those markets due to that. Transparency and complexity of the systems and market opportunities. And so some of the points that we want to tap in on is GFPP is trying to shift the culture from lowest bidder to values-based purchasing, addressing those externalized societal costs of cheap food, exploring some strategies for land, capital, and resources to support barriers of entry. Asking ourselves, could food hubs, co-ops, and more publicly funded infrastructure help? Technical assistance is available and support is growing. And working with institutions to simplify and increase transparency of their systems and their vendors. And giving the floor to folks to just ask ourselves, like, what are some of the other challenges and opportunities that we see within the food system? Right now, one of my biggest projects is working on a producer manual to help support growers and producers and food aggregators really find success like within GFPP. And the more input, the more successful I think the resource manual will be for people. So that is just, some of the conversation that we are having within our networks, but we also need to tap into other networks to really get a larger perspective on like what are things that people need support in and how can we further grow this opportunity for producers to enter to the Good Food Purchasing Policy and Initiative. Next slide, please. So where are we going with this? I could pass it back to Marley and we could talk about some of the expansion opportunities that we have coming up within GFPP.
Thanks, Dakari. So real quick, we are at the very beginning of this journey. The policy resolution passed in 2017 and 2018, and we were just getting things started, and then the pandemic hit last year, and it has, disrupted some of the process. But at the same time, I think it's also illuminated for a lot of the buyers that we're working with that just how important shifting our purchasing dollars towards a more resilient food system is, and addressing the social determinants of health that have exacerbated all of the disproportionate impacts of the pandemic on communities of color, especially. So I think institutions are feeling the urgency here that they and they really want. We're working with a lot of champions within the departments and agencies who really want to see the purchasing practices shift. So we're continuing to work with them and build out concrete goals, change contract language. We're also really starting to explore, we started with the public meal programs as priority, but want to explore how concessions environments can actually help build pathways for smaller producers who've never dipped their toes in wholesale or institutional sales to start selling to, Taste of Chicago as a, food festival. It's a very time-bound period of time. And then maybe start sourcing, selling to one of the airport concessionaires, and then maybe start, selling to one of the cultural institutions that runs senior cultural meals, and so kind of just building from there. So we are starting to talk to the concessions environments and really think through what the possibilities are for their GFPP adoption to really work in that setting. And then we've been talking to a lot of hospitals and higher ed institutions. I think some may even be on the line today, who are interested in joining the Good Food Purchasing Initiative. And we really do hope to expand the impact, the number of dollars and the volume of food that institutions are purchasing here from local farmers, from sustainable sources. That they're really shifting their public meal dollars, their institutional meal spend towards what we like to say, community health, community wealth. And I do want to flag that there was just this week a House resolution introduced to develop an Illinois Good Food Task Force that would explore how the state of Illinois could support good food purchasing. So that's some exciting kind of state level activity that I think will help complement the local work. And then we are also kind of actively ensuring that we are setting up learning about the current landscape of production and the percentage of local farmers that are selling to institutions, so that we can track how the good food purchasing policy and the related initiative is impacting the food system. Is it achieving the outcomes that it is meant to support? So those are some of the kind of good food purchasing program related activities that are underway right now. And I'll turn it back to Dakari to talk more about supply chain development related work.
Thanks, Marley. So as I mentioned, the GFPP producer manual is going to be an initial introduction to growers about the opportunities of GFPP in Metro Chicago. And it's really exciting because we're now in this implementation stage where a lot of growers have been, establishing their business, and now we're trying to grow that a little bit more to introducing them into more institutional wholesale markets. And so we plan on doing this by using some creative design and simple language, which the manual will cover what GFPP is just generally, identify some immediate opportunities for local producers to leverage the policy and program, training, certification opportunities, highlight the most critical certifications and requirements that institutional buyers will need. And it plans on living on CIFPAC's website, and it's going to be hosted very soon. And I think it'll be constantly updated with just different training opportunities coming up, important dates to flag, and contact points of persons that Marley earlier mentioned in the Kumu map, being able to read and identify how to work it. So coming soon in the spring 2021. And also you can sign up for the GFPP Coalition for an alert via the link that's added to this PowerPoint here, and we'll also embed a link within the chat as well. And we go to the next slide. Cool. The buyer and supplier mix. Exploring some networks for farmers, distributors, food service buyers, and institutional leaders to meet each other and learn about their needs and services. The goal of creating relationships in pre-competitive settings with the support of participants to prepare and development for fall and winter 2021. I think oftentimes, it's just a stark contrast in what producers and buyers are kind of experiencing and going through. And this is just a really good opportunity for people to just meet, like we mentioned, in a pre-competitive setting, really just to talk about some of their experiences just as buyers and as producers, talking about some of the challenges that both are facing, and ways that we could kind of mitigate some of the challenges when entering into these relationships, and finding honestly some equilibrium points when it comes to pricing, and people feeling value for the work that they're producing, and as well as buyers feeling okay, this is a fair price that I do feel willing to pay. So I think it's just a good opportunity to just put everybody in the same room and at the same table, to have a good opportunity to talk and build that network up. So that's coming in fall or winter 2021. So soon come, stay on the lookout. And yeah, here's some additional resources and support. AUA, Advocates for Urban Agriculture, is growing a Chicago tool. Really useful for people wanting to transition from backyard gardening to business development opportunities on an initial platform. Chicago Department of Procurement Services, learn more about Chicago's procurement process and the city-run events. We have a link embedded right here. The new financial risk management for specialty crop farmers, the Land Connection, Chicago Minority Supplier Development Council, Women's Business Development Center. And you can stay in touch with us and fill out the GFPP, again, coalition here, and we have a link embedded for you there. Next slide. We give thanks.
And thank you to you too, Dakari and Marley and Catherine. We're talking more about small farm markets and specifically the good food purchasing policy. And we're going to open it up to some questions that we've received in the chat. I know there were a couple of questions about the minority and women-owned business enterprises. So is the certification for MWBE, is that ever supported by grants? And I guess would GFPP be able to, I guess, identify farms that may fit that, like maybe women owned but don't have that certification yet?
Yeah, so typically there aren't like cost sharing or grant opportunities for minority or women-owned business certification. There's a lot of technical assistance available through the Minority Business Supplier Development Council and the Women's Business Development Center, but they do have those fees attached. And so, I think we're interested in figuring out if we can support food producers with covering at least even the initial, fee, because we know that it's not insignificant. And then I think the other point that Alex raised up in the chat is, yeah, you don't have to get this certification necessarily for a distributor to be interested in sourcing from your farm. It could be very advantageous if they're going in for a bid on one of the contracts that the public agency is looking for, and they can say, hey, I can help you meet your GFPP needs. Look, I have 3 subcontractors that have minority or women-owned business certification or veterans-owned certification as well. I have these farmers in my supply chain, they're subcontractors, and they can list them on on their bid for the contract, and that can actually give them priority preference. So it could kind of in the long term be a strategic move to open, just have like that extra preference. But as a local food producer, the distributor will be like automatically kind of incentivized to work with your farm.
Great. Also, I'll just know that I know we're getting close to 1 and some of you may have to hop off soon. There is a survey that Sarah shared in the chat that we would like you to fill out before you have to leave, but we will also stay on a few more minutes to answer any questions in the chat and respond to the dialogue there. I know that Marley has shared quite a bit of links and resources to find out more about these topics. And yeah, you can also send your questions to Dakari and Marley. Their email addresses are on the screen, but are also in the chat, as well as Catherine.
I actually have a quick question for Marley or Dakari. Do you all have any, that share the name of the business, farm, or entity, but are there some current success stories that are occurring related to the good food purchasing policy where you've seen these sort of smaller regional family-sized farms who might be normally direct marketing who have successfully been able to participate in GFPP?
Yeah, great question. So I would say the institution that has made the most progress with GFPP so far is Chicago Public Schools. And they are also one of the largest entities purchasing food in the city of Chicago. They, provide 350,000 students with meals. So they do have this, significant volume threshold that they're working with, but they have started to shift their spend towards local farmers, local producers. One of the biggest, most significant shifts was they started sourcing from Miller Poultry, which is out of Indiana. All meets some of the animal welfare standards and the local economy standard for their poultry, and they do chicken drumsticks monthly from Miller. So that's huge. Miller, traditionally has done retail sales, so that was a big big step for them. But they also have a farm to school program, and I can actually put the link in to the chat as well. They do have some kind of direct relationships with farms across the region, where they also invite the farmer to present to the kids about their farm and what they grow. So yeah, I'll leave it there, but we've also seen some really exciting impacts from California, from Los Angeles, that we're hoping to replicate here as we continue down the GFPP journey. They've been able to shift well over 20% of their purchases as a city to the local economy's standard. And, we know we're a different context here in Chicago. But we're not Southern California, but I think we can still take a lot of the lessons learned from LA and adapt them for our region.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, that's great to hear. This next question is for Catherine specifically. Where can a new Illinois farmer go for advice or coaching on business and development?
Well, for starters, I'd be happy to talk with you anytime. You can send me an email for ideas. Zach, I know at one time we had a beginning farmer training program, and there's lots of small organizations out there that do those kinds of programs, but I don't have them at the tip of my fingers right now. So we'll have to, maybe Zach can answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of specific business and business development, there are some programs that target that specific side of a farm business. Of course, we have our urban farmer training program that covers some of this a little bit, but it's not specifically about just focusing on business development. So the Land Connection is actually another good nonprofit entity out there that has some resources related to business and market development. That would be one that I would encourage you to check out. Or the State Line Farm Beginnings program as well. That's actually another good one that actually really does focus much more on the sort of business development side for new farmers. We can include some of these links as well in our follow-up when we send the links out.
Great. Well, I'll give you a couple more minutes to type anything into the chat. I know, Catherine, for you, I had a question just on the beginning slide. I was kind of surprised to see that the percentage of small farmers was so high. Do you know like what the percentage of land in the US is like owned by small farmers versus large?
We'd have to look that up with the USDA. I don't have it off at the top of my
Okay,
head.
that's understandable.
I think what was interesting for me actually about doing that was this new designation that a small farm is any farm, right, that has sold or would usually sell $1,000 worth of produce or of product. And so that opens up what a small farm is to a much wider range than it used to be at. So all you small farmers, keep that in mind when the USDA Census of Agriculture comes out in 2022. Many more of you qualify for filling that out than you realize. So please do.
All right. And yeah, thank you, Catherine, Marley, and Dakari again for all of this information. And also thank you to our audience for joining us today. And hopefully this presentation has given you some new ideas. If you have time right now, click on the link in the chat, which Sarah just shared, to complete that evaluation for today's session. We really do look at your feedback and use it to shape future webinars. Also look for an email from us with a link to archived webinar on the Illinois Local Foods YouTube channel, which may be down for a little bit, but we'll come back. And a link to a second chance to complete that evaluation. With that, have a great day, and we'll see you again next year when we have this winter webinar series. This was the last one for this year.
Awesome. Thanks, Grace. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining for the series, and we'll see everyone next year.